Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Inspire Health Podcast. Today's guest I'm bringing back now. His episode's actually going to go out probably in a few weeks, but I wanted to bring him back today because the content was so important, especially at this specific time with what we're dealing with, all the fears and uncertainties around COVID-19. So my guest today is Don Christensen, and he's the pioneer behind the much anticipated Day of Pause that explains just how important it is for all of us as a global community to slow down and pause for 24 hours. And this is a movement that he's created that will be happening May 20th. And so given that we have all of a sudden found ourselves in a bit of a forced pause, I wanted to bring you back to share some insights with people because most people I find are in a state of uncertainty. Uncertainty tends to trigger a whole lot of natural fear responses around stuff when we don't know what to expect. There's fears around health, there's fears around security, there's fears around safety. We're being inundated with it on a really global level. And at the same point, as much as it is scary, there is this space where we are literally pausing and being forced to pause for an unknown length of time. And I wanted to bring you on to help people navigate that more because for the most part, most people are not used to slowing down alone, whether taking a full-on pause from everything that they're familiar with in their life. How do we use that for some benefit as opposed to just get caught up in ruminating about the underlying fears and uncertainty that we're already dealing with? So Don, welcome to the show and thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be back, Jason.
So given the current climate of where we all are, tell us first a little bit about just the Day of Pause again that you had originally had this you'd envisioned doing and how that relates to our current situation where we are, and then we'll start to get into some ideas on what we can do with it.
Okay, well, this is like a really incredible turn of events and coincidence in a way, in that much of the purpose of this event, this 24-hour event, was to invite as many people as possible to choose to stop for a day. And what that means, what that was intended, was for them to find a supportive way to not go to work on that day, if possible, to not go to school on that day, and give everyone a chance to really notice what it felt like to step out of that autopilot rhythm that we often find ourselves running through but aren't really so aware of, and then to really notice how precious and beautiful that felt, or how uncomfortable or excruciating it felt, because that's how it feels for some people to stop. It's just like not an option. They don't want it to be an option. It's really difficult for them to do that. And then through that, to notice what is really important to them. And that's incredible to see how much of that is occurring right now just through this forced pause. The difference, of course, is that on May 20th, the invitation is still there, but to consciously pause. In other words, it is an opportunity to feel a chosen pause from a place of love rather than fear, which is much of what's happening right now. Like, there's so much reaction to this pause that's happening right now, and understandably, There's a lot of strange and scary things happening out there right now. So it's really easy for us to uh, revert immediately to that place of fear, which is our survival mechanism when it comes to the things that are unknown to us. So this event is still going forward. Um, and the invitation is still there on that day to consciously, from a different place, stop and notice what that feels like.
So Don, you said a really important point that right now, I think because of the climate of what's happening and the situation around it, that this pause that everybody is finding themselves, for the most part, being forced into from situations outside of their control, often what happens is it pulls up a lot of fear. And the original intent behind the day of pause was to do it out of a place of love and then observe what naturally surfaces in the person. So
Mm-hmm.
at this point in time, for where people are now, I know when they go to your website at the day of pause, there's certain questions that are posed in the video that you have. And at this point in time, where would you want to direct people that would be most supportive for them right now?
Mm. Okay. Well, coming back to the three questions posed in the info video, it starts with how does it feel to step out of my daily patterns? And this is really, really important because uh, so much of what so much of what takes us away from our hearts is this conditioned nervous system, not only within ourselves as individuals, but there's a collective nervous system within our society that is conditioned in a way to pull us along in a particular direction that is much about being productive and showing up to the world in a certain way, in an expected way. And I touch on this in the video when I mention how we're not getting to be how we came here to be, and that can be referenced as simply as somebody saying, "I have to go to my job. I don't like it, you know, but I have to." Right up to somebody saying, "Well, I'm content in my job and I'm okay with my living situation and I'm provided for, but something is still missing and I'm not sure what that is." And that's part of the not getting to be who we came here to be, which is basically the practice of listening to our hearts and following that as best we can. So that comes into question number two around day of pause. What do I really care about? And it's not easy to get that clear information when we are so busy and we are so caught up in our obligatory actions and what's expected of us and the other people we need to take care of, from our families to our cohorts to our employers and all of that. We've lost touch largely with what it is we really care about, which brings us into the third question: am I actually living it? Am I actually living it? And this is a question that pops up in our lives in different ways at different times, but it's so easy to write off, like, oh yeah, right, like that'll ever happen. But um, as we're experiencing now at this time in this forced pause, we are starting to see what's more precious to us and how elusive a lot of it is in our daily lives. The beauty of engaging with other human beings, the preciousness of having contact, the freedom to hop on a bus and go to the other side of the city. All of these things we take for granted, um, that we're so caught up in our autopilot, we don't see them. So much of this day is about that, and much of the intent of that is already happening at this time as we see.
Hmm. Well, and I I think a lot of people in some ways are just waiting for things to quote unquote get back to normal.
Mm,
And I think a really important part of this pause right now is to stop to ask yourself which part of normal was not working for me before, to
hmm.
get some clarity on it.
Yeah, yeah. So the word opportunity is being brought up a lot these days in terms of what can come out, what can be born from this pause. And the word unprecedented, of course, is coming up a lot. I believe what is most unprecedented will be the amount of cooperation required to bring something truly valuable out from this experience for each of us. And there's a really, really incredible chance and window opening here for us to do this at this time. But and it can look like this really big, lofty mountain that we have to try and pick up and move, but it's not really. It comes back to those three questions, really. Notice how it feels to step away from what you think you should be doing or ought to be doing. What is it you really, really care about, and go for that. And then it's baby steps from there. And when you connect with your hearts in that way, and more people do that, something significant starts to change on the foundational level of our society. We've already seen like tremors of that with Greta Thunberg and her gatherings, and just the excitement around the women's marches and things like that. Like there's a rumbling happening, and that's because people are doing exactly this. They're stepping away from their fear. They're listening to what that message is coming through them, and they're taking action around it. And it doesn't mean necessarily running out and starting an NGO tomorrow, or even making a placard and going out to a march. It can be something so accessible and simple as maybe looking somebody in the eyes when you ask them, how are you doing? Or maybe making a hug last 5 seconds more than you might normally. The impact that little things like that can have on other people, and how that spreads, cannot be overlooked. It's really, really powerful, and it's at our fingertips.
Hmm. So, what would be some almost when people are not used to pausing? And for the most part, if people don't practice pausing in their daily life very much, or spend time even in introspection or something, it's a fairly new idea and a new concept. And a lot of times it can be really uncomfortable and not even really knowing where to begin. So, what could you offer as some maybe a little bit of loose structure for people
Mm,
that would like to entertain the pause and start to try and see where they can utilize it as best as they can? Because the bottom line is, whether or not you wanted it to happen or not, you wanted to have a pause. If you could change it, you probably would. But the bottom line is, this is where we are right now. So, given
mhm,
that this is the situation that we're in, how do we work with it? I
mhm,
remember my grandma used to always say, she goes, and my grandma had gone through a lot of different tragedy over her life, and a lot of loss and a lot of heartache. And she just had this way of always coming out of it. And
mm.
she would say, if I could change it, I would change it in a heartbeat. But given that I can't, you do the best you can with what the good Lord gives you. And she just kept it simple like that. And that's how she lived her life. So it's not to say, if we could change this, that maybe a lot of people would, for sure. I get that. But given that this is what the current state of reality is, how do we use this as best as we can? And so for
Mm.
people that don't really know how they can even use it for the best way they can, what would be some structure that you might offer?
I think one of the most simplest things to do, and again, I say this with a lot of care and respect, because be, just because I find it something simple to do doesn't mean it does for everybody. But it can start with simply pausing, which is to sit in one spot and close your eyes and and just notice. Notice as best you can. You could take it either two ways. You can label what is coming up for you. So it can be silliness. If you feel silly, like sitting there quietly with your eyes closed, you can notice, okay, there's thoughts of silliness or ridiculousness or curiosity or okay, I notice how I think I'm wasting my time right now sitting here with my eyes closed. So that's the labeling part that helps us start to slow things down and recognize what is actually happening within us. Then there's the flip side of that, which is the unlabeling. So when you notice stuff start to come up, you remove the labels and come back to the felt sensation of it, like just how does this discomfort feel in my body? I can notice my urge to want to get back up. I can notice my lower back maybe a little sore. I can feel my bum on my seat, whatever it may be. It can sound silly or pointless, but this is the rewiring of our nervous systems necessary to start to step away from our roboticness and come back into that creative flow that moves through us moment by moment and takes us more into a place of harmony with life, even if it's something we don't want to do and we have a job we have to go to because right now this is the only way I know how to put food on the table. You can still become more harmonious with your actions, even if it's like, I shouldn't say no one, lots of people are still working, but a lot of people aren't working. But even like tasks around the house, just noticing what it feels like to wash the dishes, to feel the water on your hands, or take pride in the fact that you have dishes to wash and you have food in the fridge to put on those dishes to make them dirty. The list goes on and on. Another really, really valuable practice is morning circle, and this is particularly helpful for families and those with children. And that is breaking the pattern to bring the family together. And I think this is probably more accessible these days for many of us than normally. Bringing the family together before or maybe after breakfast and literally sitting in a circle. And you go around the circle and you do a check-in with one another. And that check-in is basically you are creating a setting in that moment with those around you, a setting of safety to be able to share how you're feeling physically, mentally, and emotionally. So you might be sitting there and saying, I'm still feeling really achy in my body, and I'm also like really agitated. I'm agitated at how I was woken up this morning because I thought you guys were really noisy, and it's making me feel a bit angry too because I don't like being woken up that way. And a sharing like that can create a setting of understanding and empathy for the others in the circle. It's important that people practice like not taking it personally, but just it's heart opening to sit there and listen to somebody share in this way. And then you go around the circle and you take turns, and some of the kids might be too young to really understand it, but just for them to see the family coming together, sit in a circle, listen to each other, witness that time being given, that care being given to every individual, and how their voice matters in that moment, and how what they say to the others is important. Very, very powerful exercise, and it can really set the tone for the day for that group. You can do this two people if it's just a couple living together. If you live alone, it's the closest thing that comes to a seated meditation. That's not call it meditation if you're not comfortable with that word, but you basically, there's kind of a circle of you and yourself where you acknowledge to yourself, how am I feeling today? Where am I? What's happening in my thoughts? Where am I in my body? How, what's the emotional tone in my heart? All of those things, noticing that starts to shake the nervous system up a bit and bring it back into a place of more cohesiveness and alignment with, again, with our hearts, or our soul, if you want to call it that, or our creative flow, whatever term you're comfortable with.
People just need some place to start the process when they're not
Mm-hmm.
used to it. And to also know that, I mean, uncertainty naturally triggers that fear response. So it's a part of our innate being that we get. Fear comes up when we don't know what to expect. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
natural part, but it does, if we work with it, it can dissolve and turn into something else that might be of more value to us. It can be exhausting on the nervous system to be in a state of fear and worry all the time. But
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, that fear and worry really stems because of what we are projecting into the future, more so than where we are right at this very moment. So whether
Yeah.
that's fear of what's going to happen, and there's a lot of that, and I totally get it. But one thing that I think is really interesting with this too is that the I think the bigger message, and I'd like you to speak about underlying the day of pause, is the concept of interconnectedness. And I tell you, if anything has showed us how interconnected we all are as a global community, viruses and pandemics like that tend to do it. They cross all cultures, they cross all all races, all religions. Nobody is exempt from it for the most part. Anybody can be connected to it. So the only difference is that it is more of an interconnectedness through a little bit more of worry and concern and fear as opposed to from a place of love. But at the same point, we are being showed how interconnected we are. How does that bigger message come out that you were talking about before with the day of
Oh.
pause?
Mm.
Are as a global community, viruses and pandemics like that tend to do it. They cross all cultures, they cross all all races, all religions. Nobody is exempt from it for the most part. Anybody can be connected to it. So the only difference is that it is more of an interconnectedness through a little bit more of worry and concern and fear as opposed to from a place of love. But at the same point, we are being showed how interconnected we are. How does that bigger message come out that you were talking about before with the day of pause?
Mm. Oh. So my heart hurts for all of those suffering at this time, whether it be you are in a hospital bed on a respirator because you have the virus, or whether it be your cancer surgery has been postponed because there's no beds available, or you know somebody who's sick right now, or you are simply sitting at home scared out of your wits and don't know how you're going to pay your bills, or you want to go for a walk outside and you don't know whether it's safe to. All of these things cause suffering, and I feel for that, and I feel for those people. And at the same time, I cannot help but sense a type of medicine that this virus is actually bringing us, in a way, in that it is, we're all susceptible to it. It can touch us all. There's a beauty in how none of us can pay our way out of the possibility of it touching our lives or our very selves in some way. And like you said, like it's like that's a big leveler right there. That's an equalizer right there. Um, our our behaviors as human beings are fed by our perceptions, and our perceptions are based on the information we are given. And to live in a society like this, so much of that information we receive comes from how we are told to live, how we are told to be, how we are told to look, how we were told to talk or dress or whatever it may be. So there's no surprise that when an experience like this comes up, that we've been so conditioned to be in that mode of survival, as you spoke of, that reptilian brain, that fight or flight, that makes us immediately rush out to buy as much toilet paper as we can and maybe fight somebody for it. There's a lot of ridicule toward those people right now, but like, speaking from an empathetic place, I can understand why they would respond that way, because we have been conditioned to believe there is not enough for all of us, and that there's not enough help out there for all of us from others. And this is where we need to start to shift our perception, gather our information from a different place. And the most effective place I can find, and it's touched upon in a lot of religions. I'm not a religious person myself, and I haven't studied a lot of religions, but I know that many religions touch upon this, or either in conscious practices. The clearest information and the answers we really need can come from within. And this is all coming back to that pausing, all coming back to stopping for a moment, getting out of our regular routines and taking that time to notice, what is my nervous system like? Can I tone it down? Can I notice what's important to me right now? Can I take one small action in the direction of what is important to me right now? And that's when real shift starts to happen, not just within our own lives, but the influence we have on the greater population.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think something that's come up a lot too is when we are in our quote unquote our regular routine, or when life is back to normal. Prior to all of this happening, I would say a lot of people that I speak with or that I work with, a lot of them aren't really totally satisfied with the way things were. And one of the big factors was always there wasn't enough time to do all of the things that they would like to do.
Mm,
Now, sometimes we get those things that show up in ways that we didn't expect them to show up. But one thing that we do, or a lot of us do have right now, is more time. So I think right now, given that we do have more time, this is a good place to start that practice on getting more clarity around all the things that you were talking about. What really do I feel like I would like to be doing versus what do I feel
mhm,
like I maybe have to do or have been doing for a long
mhm,
time, that doesn't really work for me anymore. And that realization almost naturally surfaces, I find, when we're not trying to actively go after it, but when we just slow things down enough to allow it to reveal itself. And so if we can start to slow things down a little bit, given that we've got this time right now, and utilize this forced pause in as much of a productive way as we can, I feel like there's going to be a potential for a lot of authenticity to surface in people's lives too.
I totally agree with that, and that's the path of the warrior, the one who courageously stands up to truth. Because when you start to take those baby steps in the direction of what it is your heart wants, you actually come up against, and I'm speaking in generals, but you come up against a lot of resistance, because you are starting to go against the flow in a lot of ways. You're starting to show up in ways that are different than people want you to show up or expect you to show up. And it can be very, very disruptive, and upsetting for a lot of people. But this is this is why somebody can go take an intensive yoga retreat and come back and maybe break up with their partner or quit their job and start their own business, or something. Some insight has come where they're like, wow, this is where this is where I really want to be going, because I took that time to stop and to listen. And collectively, that's what's happening right now. So yes, you speak of that opportunity again. It's really, really important, I think, that we not shake our heads in doubt and go, oh yeah, like the rest of the world is going to like step up to that. The moment we start to expect action from others, we start to dampen our own strength. We start to lessen our own ability to take action in our own lives, which, as I mentioned earlier, inspires others. It's the most wonderful way to teach morals, I think, to your children, for instance, is for a parent to live honestly in their lives, and wholly and creatively and justly, rather than trying to, in a linear way, pass these teachings on down, because it influences them. They see it happening before their eyes, and how it affects, how it ripples out to the world. This is what we need right now from as many of us as possible. And what that means in particular, I don't know. That's up to each individual. But it does start with the pause. It starts with typically the discomfort, the unease, or maybe the excruciating pain that required to stop what it is we are doing and choose differently.
Hmm. And what's really important for people to realize too is that we often need to have times of creative insight that will redirect and guide our life in different ways. And those creative insights don't happen in the go, go, go times. We're in a different brainwave state. We are not accessible to that type of information. And
Mm-hmm.
when we get privy to those aha moments, or those times of deep inner knowing or connection, those happen in the slow times. And so they happen in the times that we take to pause and check in and listen in and allow it to surface. So
Mm-hmm.
m- my my hope for all of us is that while we are in this, whether we liked it or not, we're here, is that if we can all do whatever is going to be of most value for ourselves and the global community, in my mind, that is to go inward and to connect with what is of most meaning to ourselves and to others. And to me, that's what bridges this community of interconnectedness that you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, Related to that, again, I think it's important to come back to realize that creative flow, to practice it, to truly practice it, starts with those baby steps. It's really easy to hear the word creativity and think it's got to be some massive action of helping somebody, or big art project, or whatever it may be. But like, notice at the end of this podcast, when it ends, stop, feel what's the next thing you really need to do. It might be you have to go to the bathroom, you know you have to relieve yourself. But in the realization of that, and in the taking of action in that, in the truth of that, and you go to the washroom and take care of yourself in that way, you have started a simple little action like that. You have started to soften your nervous system around the go, 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 do, produce, 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 and just get into that truth of the moment. And that's part of the reprogramming. So your creative flow is really just being honest in this next breath.
Mm-hmm. Don, thanks so much for your insights around everything here. Any other words of support or wisdom for our community at this point in time?
Not uh, not an easy thing to do, but again, I think it's the path of the warrior. A really helpful word right now is just trust. Trust what's happening. Trust your fear coming up enough to notice it, and then to inquire with it around, is your fear valid in this moment? Trust that the pain that the world is going through right now has a purpose. Trust that the very next action you want to take, as simple as it may be, but as long as it's honest and supportive and not physically hurting anyone else, that it's part of what needs to happen to come into your creative flow.
Mm-hmm. Don, where can people learn more about the work you're doing, specifically about the Day of Pause, so that they can connect to maybe some other resources available to them?
Dayofpause.org. There's an FAQ page there that I think can be really helpful, and we'll be modifying it as this global challenge continues, and as we get closer to the day. We don't know what's going to happen or what state the planet will be in on May 20th, but we're going to hold the intention of using that day from a place of love to really check in. We might not have the freedom to do what was also offered as part of the Day of Pause intention, which was to notice what your heart wants to do on that day and then go do it, especially if we're confined to our homes. But again, to simply acknowledge what your heart's speaking to you is such a gift. It's such a gift.
Maybe to connect in with what the heart actually wants, and then maybe write it out or something. That could be a good.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be like long journaling or anything. The chalkboard in the kitchen or a sheet of paper, just slap it down on there and put it up in the bathroom mirror or something. 2 or 3 words, like what comes up for you that's really powerful that you want to carry through your days.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Don, thanks so much for coming back on again, and we'll be sure to put that information in the show notes so people know how to connect to it, and we might have you on again prior to that, depending on where things are.
Okay, thank you so much for your support, Jason.
You're welcome. Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.